where Americans had machines, but were not yet fundamentally machinic.
Sometimes when you're driving down the road all by yourself, you begin to hear a voice that tells you need to look around, pay attention. Maybe something isn't quite right. That voice is me. It's the voice of Gord. Hey, good morning, everyone. It's Thursday, May 30th, 2024, and we are all still living in the machine. You would have heard that opening clip from my good buddy Andy Hickman, who you might know from Twitter as ShagBarkHick, or from the Hickman's Hinterlands Substack. This is Andy's third appearance on my show, although we did record this at the beginning of April, and I've just been busy and haven't got many episodes out as I'd like to. However, I wanted to get this one out because Andy's getting married in 2 days, and I thought, hey, I should at least get this out while he's still a single man, or at least in honor of his wedding. Andy's gone through a lot since I last spoke with him. Over and above the fact he's getting married on Saturday, he met his dad for the first time on a month-long Amtrak journey around America, which you would have read if you followed his Substack, Hickman's Hinterlands. In this conversation recorded before that journey, Andy discusses with me his ideas around life in America, as he calls it, Machinic, which is a riff on the writer Paul Kingsnorth's ideas around the machine. We touch on another book by a guy named Wang Huning, a Chinese government functionary who came to America and wrote a very interesting book called America Against America. And we discuss many other things through Andy's eyes of how he sees the place and just what's going on in the machine. It's a pretty long conversation, and I hope you guys enjoy it. And maybe even by the time you listen to this, Andy and Keturah will already be married and, on their way of their honeymoon, which I believe is to hitchhike throughout the northeast of the United States, the Maritimes of Canada, and up into Labrador. So if you're not already subscribed to Hickman's Hinterlands Substack and you want great travel writing, insights into what's going on God's earth in 2024, and just what it's like to be a traveling man these days, you need to go and read his Substack. It's all good stuff. While you're there, subscribe to mine if you haven't already. autonomoustruckers.substack.com. Got lots of stuff happening here soon. The trial for the Coots 4 guys, well, the remaining 2 of them anyway, gets underway next week, and I'll have a fair bit to say about all of that. All right, well, without any further delay, let's get to Mr. Andy Hickman. All right, g'day everybody. Welcome back to another fantastic episode of Voice of Gord. I'm Gord, and this is my voice. The other voice you're going to hear is yet another returning guest, someone who, for the life of me, I can't figure out why isn't on more shows, but if the internet wants to leave it to me, I'll take it. You've probably seen his amazing threads on Twitter, and or you might be a subscriber to his fantastic Substack, which is just growing by leaps and bounds with some fantastic writing on such topics as the marginalia of existence in far northern New York State, what's becoming of the soul of America as of late, cheap modes of living, and many other things under the Lord's sun. Please welcome to the show the other voice today, once again, Mr. Andy Hickman, the ShagBarkHick.
Good morning, Gord. It's good to be good to be back for the third time.
Yes, sir.
I'm just watching the snow melt up here out my window in northern New York State, and I think the spring's about to begin. So spirits are high up here.
Good. The spirits might be high. Although, to the average person who's not used to it, it's still looking pretty gloomy. Um, you know, is that from the mate, or is it that cold in your house that like I'm seeing? Get
You're seeing my breath. Yeah.
that thermostat up, boy. Jeez.
I did all last winter on 45. Before Keturah came, I didn't put it a hair above 45 all year, and I only burned about a half a tank of fuel. That was it.
The living cheap is not an act. You really are a cheapskate and don't want to spend any money more than you have to.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, because I got it from my uncle. My uncle taught me when I was a kid that freedom comes from the Constitution and from your ability to be cheap. And a lot of guys get taught that freedom comes from the Constitution, but not everybody gets taught the second piece. And the second piece, his reasoning was every dollar that you've got to spend, you've got to earn. And so if you've got to spend it, then you've got to earn it, and that means you're not free. You got to work to get the money to spend. So if you don't have to spend anything, you don't have to work, and you're living like a rich man without any money. So I took that to heart as a kid because it made so much sense.
I'm not an expert on the Bible or any other religious documents, but as I understand it, frugality and thrift are considered very, very good practices in spiritual terms.
Yeah, I think that's true. In fact, I've had a lot of conversations these days with Keturah, my woman, about modesty, and she'll a lot of people go on about how women, who maybe women who wear low cut shirts and high skirts and such are being immodest, and that maybe there's an argument for that, but modest used to mean a person that doesn't really show what they've got financially. And so I find that to be kind of an interesting thing to sort of say, look, I don't need very much. I'm a simple person. I don't need to show off that I got a $70,000 SUV and I'm driving it down the block, and I've got my zero turn lawnmower that's brand new with payments on it. And, just got my house re-sided and I'm showing it all off to the world. It's like, and then some of those people are Christians who will have the gall to judge a woman for wearing a mini skirt out to the bar, right? And it's like, well,
You're doing the same
maybe
thing in a different way
in a
yourself.
different way, right? Yeah. So
Uh,
I'm
I,
not I'm not big into judging people over stuff like that, but I think it's worth considering for anybody who's religious.
and as Colonel Kurtz said in Apocalypse Now, it's judgment that defeats us. So
Right.
interesting you said the zero turn lawnmower. I had to go to Lowe's the other day to get some last minute parts and hardware and some things I needed for this project I had to wrap up. And they had a whole row of lawnmowers out because it's now springtime. And one of them zero turn lawnmowers, that's, a guy like you could probably live for about 3 years on the money it costs for one of those.
What do they want? 8,000?
Yeah, about that. 8, 10 grand.
Yeah, about 10 grand. Wow. Yeah, I live on about 13 a year. So yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the amount of money that goes out the door. I mean, everyone's talking about this no matter what podcast or media you're consuming, because the last couple of years of inflation caused by money printer going burr, decades of terrible government economic policy, and then all of the other troubles our society has faced as of late. But that don't phase a guy like you who is already living lean.
Yeah, I think that's true. If well, think about the third world, right? Like there's a lot of third world countries where the US dollar is sort of the de facto stabilizing currency for everyday life. They're not really concerned about Jerome Powell's behavior in the Federal Reserve. They just see American dollars and they say, "Great, yeah, we like that." So And that's probably owing to the fact that the basic necessities of their life don't cost very much. I don't know. The inflation thing really hits only if you're really living the normal lifestyle, because I think that the goal with the Federal Reserve and the way the powers that be and how they do everything is to sort of suck away the kulak middle class people who are living a life of historical luxury comparatively. These Western governments that are printing all the money, they're paying you to either get rich or be poor. So if you just lean into being poor, you're not going to have that bad of a time with inflation. But I I can't tell everybody to do that. But
No, but you try though, or at least it's perceived that you're trying.
Yeah.
One of the I if anybody that's listening to this doesn't follow Andy's Twitter, you're missing out. You're quite possibly one of the most misunderstood, and or I don't even know if they're misunderstanding you. Like I think they're doing that on purpose.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
you make these really sort of intricate posts asking these questions about life, whether it's, the ultra super micromanagement of life in America today, to economic policy, to, as you put it, if you lean into quote unquote being poor, you're actually much more free. And like it scrambles a lot of people's brains. And I don't know if that's just because of the zeitgeist we live in and where people's heads are at in 2024 or what, but just even if even if you don't agree with what Andy says, just go into the replies and see all the other people spurging out about you as entertainment. Like, is Elon Musk cutting you checks? Like, are you getting paid? Because some people are, apparently.
Sort of. I find that for the effort, I don't get paid much from Twitter. I mean, I've averaged it out. I net about $37 a month from Twitter. I've had certain months where I've done better, but I've never made more than $100 in a month on Twitter ever. So
Right.
um,
But I mean,
and I
I guess so. Anybody that knows me knows my troubles with Twitter. I've been kicked off like 4 or 5 times, and
right,
I don't, there's a lot of Musk fanboys out there saying he's the free speech savior. I don't know about that. um,
yeah,
but it's come to my attention that a number of people, like just regular old folks like you and I, that post on Twitter, are getting checks, 30, $40 a month, $50 a month, something. But
right,
you have to pay for the blue check first before you get on their program. And it's
right,
like, I have no guarantee that if I pay that money, I'm not going to get kicked off the very next day. And then
right.
because Twitter has no customer service, no humans to talk to, I can't demand my money back. So I'm a little loath to take part in this silly program. But I mean,
Uh,
if people are making a little bit of money on it, fair play to them.
yeah, yeah. That's an interesting point. I have not had a difficulty with the banning for whatever reason, because I really do take I take care to word everything in a way where it's like, okay, I could kind of get away with it. The only time I ever got suspended was for suggesting that people who eat with only a fork and not a fork and a knife are barbarians. I think I said that in passing in some discussion, and somebody flagged me for advocating suicide because I was talking about a knife. So I got banned for 24 hours. I thought that was insane. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Wow. Wow. Yeah.
yeah,
That's, why am I not surprised at that story? But
right, right,
you know, for a guy who I wouldn't say you fetishize foreign cultures, but like you're certainly not afraid to talk about like how other people in different parts of the world live, how other people in different economic strata live, and
right.
the sort of ancient ways of being that are manifesting themselves in various cultures around the world you don't see online every day, right? So like, lots of people in East Africa still eat with their hands. They, like you'll get what's that bread that the Ethiopians make? It's like a really thin, it's almost like a burrito. And they just sort of like,
Yeah, I don't know what to call that, but I've had that before and I like
yeah,
it. Yeah,
I
yeah,
think it's called injera, but yeah, you just take it and you sort of like
right,
clump it around your vegetables or your lamb or your whatever you're eating, and then just stuff it in your mouth. There's no forks, there's no knives. You're just the only thing stopping anything on your hands is the bread. So
right, right.
and so yeah, you're having a cup of yerba mate, and
Oh yeah,
and have recently discussed the possibility of moving to Argentina. And you also discuss all these modes of being and all these possibilities for people to continue living on the margins and, as you put it, leaning into poverty. There's been a few people who've been expressed some concern for the direction of your posting and your writings in the last few months. They're like, "What's
right.
going on with Andy? Is he dooming? Is he going to be okay? Is Keturah going to be okay? Like, what's happening
Yeah,
with these guys?" So I want to provide this opportunity for you to verbally explain yourself.
yeah. I think no matter what I say, a lot of people will be liable to medicalize me or say that I'm out of my mind or whatever, because I think a lot of people are psychologically invested in voices that they find online who they have something to say that the person likes, but when that person saying those things doesn't totally endorse the thing they like, be it America or be it their air conditioner or their SUV or whatever. In as much as they have an emotional attachment to that thing, they're going to kind of freak out a little sometimes. So no, basically, I can't defend myself, but I've had to. I feel like I've had to pivot some because meeting Keturah, and we're getting married here in June, and that first
Party
comes
of the
love.
year. The wedding to rule over all other weddings in 2024 and beyond. Don't miss it.
Yeah, I think it'll be a day to remember. But first comes love, then comes marriage, and then comes the baby and the baby carriage, and it's like you're looking at the United States, and it's like I've never actually really fit in here, and neither has Keturah. And people will say, "Oh, well, you haven't been everywhere," and it's like, I kind of have. I explicitly sought out places where I might be a good fit for, 5 years and more, and found a bunch of places that are of interest, maybe, but a lot of them are very dysfunctional or very strange, um, and sort of fleeting and liable to change. I love living in Slab City, but Slab City's gone downhill. Quartzsite, Arizona is like okay, but it's sort of a big RV show, right? And my own hometown, it's like I have a love-hate relationship with it. I come back to upstate after dreaming of upstate for months and years, and I'm out somewhere else, and I think, yeah, I'll go back to upstate and everything will make sense. And my family's just looking at me like, what the hell are you doing here? Why are you here? So uh, plus my mother's going to pass away soon. I mean, she's really not doing well with her cancer, and the whole sum total of it is if I stay here, we're going to be lonesome. We're going to be swimming upstream every single day. We're going to be isolated, and the government might even come after us. So which is wild to talk to you about because you come from Canada to come here because here is better than Canada. But as a native born son of America, I look south of our border quite in a similar way as you may have looked at the U.S. from the Canadian point of view.
Right.
Uh,
Well,
and and I
it's interesting that you discuss the like coming after you because your writing often focuses on these modes of being that are maybe bizarre or not accepted by others, and but you're not really doing anybody any wrong, right? And like I don't think you or I would describe ourselves as libertarians. I mean, I was in that camp for a long time. I'm not anymore, but
right,
the sort of base foundation of the United States, at least on paper, and at least in the mythos we tell ourselves about the U.S., is that sort of live and let live, come here, do your thing, produce what you can, and for the most part, the government's going to leave you alone, and we'll all try and get along. And you've expressed some reservations about the fact that that's no longer the case and how it might impact you and your young family here once it comes around.
Right, right. Yeah, I
And
mean, this is the country of Ruby Ridge. You know what I mean? Like Ruby Ridge, Oklahoma City bombings, FBI entrapment, people wrongly going to prison for the most absurd things that you could imagine. And anybody who's been plugged into the community of anarchists and libertarians and religious traditionalists and things finds there's somebody with a story. And I don't know. I don't want to be that guy. I gather that there are other places on Earth where the state doesn't care about you or what you're doing. They just don't care. You know, that there's countries where there's no equivalent to CPS, right? They're not going to intervene. They're not going to break down your door because of something you said online, and they're not going to put your kids in some kind of sick foster care setup because they've deemed you to be crazy because you want to live, say, in a teepee, right? Which these are stories that have happened in the United States, and you're not really free in this country. This country is kind of like a work camp where if you're not producing in a very specific way that is legible to everybody around you, you've got a certain amount of risk. And you're either going to live life on the run and know that there's cop collars everywhere you go who are going to look at you and say, you're a freak. I'm telling the government. Or you're going to leave the country and you're going to go somewhere where it's like, yeah, whatever, man. Like, you want to homeschool your kids and live in a tent? That sounds like it would suck to me, but more power to you, you know? So I don't know. I'm forced to consider at least the idea of leaving this country because, frankly, I love the land of this country and I love the history of this country, but the social fabric of the United States as it is today, I've never really gotten along with it. I've never really had a good time with it. And basically, every time I have, it's been an exception to the rule that I've had to work very hard to find. So people don't like to hear this because they want to be optimistic about this country. But you can look at the United States. It's only gotten worse in the last 5 years, right? 5 years ago, it was still pre-COVID, and we had problems, and we still had all the post 9/11 crap that stayed with us, like the TSA and anti-terrorism weird laws that don't make any sense. And we still had a sort of existential sense of defeat after the 2008 recession, and there was just sort of this weird delirium that just stuck and never found any resolution. And then COVID just ratcheted it up to the moon, and it feels permanent now. So I can't change it on my own. That leads me to consider other options.
right. As the kids say, many such cases. You alluded to my homeland, to Canada. There's all kinds of bad news coming out of there. There was a poll a friend of mine put up that like something like given the chance 70% of people from Canada would emigrate somewhere else. The jobs numbers are bad, inflation is through the roof, highest real estate prices on earth. Trudeau just imposed a new carbon tax that's basically going to increase the cost of everything, and people are already kind of economically on the edge for numerous reasons, but
Right.
it just keeps getting worse. They've been leaning into punishing dissenters. There's still two plus years later, hundreds of people who were picked up during Freedom Convoy, charged with minor stuff like mischief, failing to obey a police officer, intimidation, all the baloney charges they give people because they haven't got
Right.
anything else to charge someone who's just protesting. And many of those people defeated their charges in court, were acquitted, and there's no double jeopardy in Canada apparently because the Crown is appealing the acquittals and dragging these people back to court. And it's like Canada's got all of these humongous problems, and the government is expending our tax dollar resources on chasing peaceful protesters for something that happened 2.5 years ago where there was no problem.
Right.
So like,
Right. Right.
and you see a little bit of that here with the January 6 people still, and it's
Right.
just like, as much as you're the sort of optimists and the people who we know that really like America, and I really like America. I mean, the issue is that it's got all of these problems that are not resolved, and it appears while a certain caste of people continue to manage this place,
Right.
and the ideas that animate that certain caste of people are in vogue amongst those in power, it's not going to be fixed anytime soon, is it?
No, I don't think it will. And you can look at the trend. It's pretty clear. There's even I mean, a lot of people talk like Donald Trump was some kind of savior, that he represented some kind of turning of the tide. But you actually take an inventory of how the lives of people I know, or my family members or something, how did they change? He didn't build the wall. He didn't lock her up. He actually changed the tax code to sort of punish the poor, so that now you have to file if you make even $600 in a year, whereas it used to be more than $10,000 a year before you would not have to file. You could make 10, 12,000 a year and not even tell the government. It didn't matter. Nobody cared. And I don't know. I'm not impressed. And I don't see any candidates in any of politics that's going to change it. And what I see coming out of the intellectual class is more of the same. And the culture just sort of goes right along with it and makes a big. There's a big industry out of being bitter and resentful, but sort of impotently. Because I'll say, great, you want to be bitter and resentful? Maybe I share the sentiment, but I'm not going to sit here and be impotently bitter and resentful. You have to sort of pitch me on what you're doing that's making a difference. And when you talk this way to like so-called political people, they get really rankled because at day's end they don't really have a lot to say. Um,
Well, no, and I mean,
and
some of that, as you put it, resentment, bitterness, you see how it manifests itself, as you put it, with these political people. Like, you scroll Twitter or any other social media, and the supposed intellectual caste, or at least a certain portion of them who are claiming to offer how to fix things, are engaged in their own weird, like, star worship. Like, oh, Candace
right,
Owens got fired by Ben Shapiro, and like a week later, that's half of what these people are still talking about. Like, who cares? Where where
right,
where are the ideas? Where are your plans? What are we doing here to help other people? I don't care about Candace Owens or Ben Shapiro. These people are meaningless to me. Why is this
right,
cluttering up the discourse? Right?
right, right,
Like, where are your ideas? You know?
right. Yeah, yeah. Or what did Charlie Kirk say about women in their 30s this week? It's like, I don't care. It's irrelevant. It won't change a thing. The guy is just a goofball. I don't care about any of this stuff. So at day's end, I mean, I don't know what to do with any of that information. And people will say, oh, well, you write, so maybe you can, make a difference by writing. And there's some truth there, but I'm not so conceited as to imagine that my own abilities as a writer can really make an impact in the time frame that they would have to make an impact. Because that's the thing, is there are ways to catalyze change. I'm not saying that there aren't any, but they take so much time. And those who are enemies of the basic cultural imperative of like original early America, as I would like to see flourish, the enemies of that, they're so efficient. They lay it out in months, and all of a sudden there's been new laws, there's been new policies, there's been new. Everything changes until I'm going to be 30 next month, and I am not living in the same country that I was living in when I was a boy. You know, when I was a boy, they taught us about Daniel Boone and Johnny Appleseed and the frontiersmen and all these different cool things. And now nobody gets excited about that stuff, but a bunch of people who are on the margins, and the people who get excited about it would never dare to live in a similar manner for fear of not being successful in the ways that an American is supposed to be successful. So
Right.
I
Well,
look at that and I say, what am I going to do with that? You know?
right. Well, but your writing though does speak to these earlier ideas, archetypes, notions, and principles. Like, yeah, a guy like yourself that, wants to be illegible, live on the margins, be thrifty.
Right.
That's like, the whole ethos of America in quotation marks, and at least its sort of founding ideals, or maybe not, if not the ideals, at least how America understood itself for a long time, was to allow a place for people to live as they saw fit. And
Right.
it's hard now to do that, as we've observed with this sort of like cultural enclosure that's now backed up by, you know state agencies and the feds. And
Right.
but
Right.
like, I think what you're doing in writing this stuff, even if it's not your intent, is to like help people realize that, maybe leaning into frugal illegibility is a way to actually, in your own life, keep that sort of part of the American spirit alive, right?
Right.
Like, as people forget what this place used to be like and what it was supposed to be about. There's a scene in this book by a guy named Ray Bradbury, Fahrenheit 451. Have you ever read that?
Yep. Yep.
At the
Yep.
very end of the book, this sort of, fireman who switches teams and then goes off to help the people preserving books is wandering around this sort of dissident encampment in the woods, and people are just talking, and they've committed to memory all these great works of literature, right? Because that's the only place they can be safe, is inside in yourself, right?
Right.
The firemen can't, flame throw your brain. I mean, maybe they can try and kill you, but
Right. Right.
you're, by internalizing these ideas, memorizing them, you're protecting it. Like, and a lot of people say, "Oh, we've got this internet that's going to save all of human knowledge in perpetuity." Okay, cool. Until we get blasted by some kind of huge solar flare, or an electro EMP weapon or something like that, or
Right.
some
Right.
a possible mass cataclysm that reduces our built infrastructure to ash, or
Right.
commits it to the junk heap. And then what do you do? So
Yeah.
in the life you have lived and are living and are continuing to consider to live, and by writing about it, I think it's good for others to know that people like you are still around, adhering to these ideals, and sort of making that possible, making that marginal existence possible. And I don't mean marginal in a negative sense, but like literally living
Sure.
on the margins, in
Right.
these sort of like zones of illegibility, or liminality, as it were.
Right. Right. Yeah. And for some reason, it's read as a depressing project by some. Just to point out, that like the Bitcoin people are funny. The Bitcoin people come up to me and they're like, "Oh, well, the problem's the Federal Reserve, the U.S. dollar, and that's the matrix, and you got to unplug from the matrix with this computer program that does nothing, and then you have a little token that says you have something that did nothing. That if an electromagnetic pulse from the sun were to destroy all the circuitry of all electronics, which it could easily do, and we're actually overdue for it, your little token doesn't mean anything." And they say, "Well, you could memorize it in your mind." It's like, yeah, okay. I mean, sure enough, I suppose I could, but uh, you know, uh, people don't like to be reminded of the ephemerality of the technological base of our lifestyle of historically, by historical comparison, totally extreme luxury. You know, Yes, you can see your breath in my house right now. I'm wearing three sweaters. I've got three sweaters. I'm like, this is an old formulation, and of course they practically crucified Jimmy Carter for saying exactly that. Hey, put on a sweater. The price of gas is high. Turn your thermostat down a little and put on a sweater. It's very practical in an old world sort of way, but people don't like that because it's an emotional thing. It's I want my comfort on demand. Let me hit the button and it's all good, and I get my heat, my chicken nuggets, and all that.
Yeah, it's taken as a given that these very new to human history, widespread luxuries are going to be
Yeah,
there and are going to be given to you at a low price, or possibly with some installments. But like,
right,
yeah, we take these things as givens and as assumptions, you know. And
right.
if you question them in any way, like, woe unto you, you know.
Right. And I find it's actually more optimistic to understand that these things are new, that they don't need to be here, that they probably won't last. Because if you highlight the fact that humans have been biologically, anatomically modern humans for probably at least 150,000 years, we've made it for all that time. And for what, 1% of our history, we've had machines, uh, less than 1% probably, and less than probably about 100th of a percent we've had digital technology, right? So we don't need this stuff, so it's actually a more it's another way of saying that you're going to make it. I know everybody loved when I said that video a year and a half ago or whatever. They got a kick out of me just having an optimistic message, and there's a lot of people that sort of wanted me to just keep saying that, and I am still saying that, by saying, look, yeah, you can live in a tent that is 40 cubic feet and not freezing. You can do it. And you could probably have a good old time and have great friends and great memories with your family and be a whole lot freer than you would be if you had a giant mortgage and you were worried about the price of fuel oil, worried about your broken furnace or the electric costs or whatever. Um, I think that's cool. I think that's neat. I mean, I also, like, when I was a kid, it was when I was a teenager, it was the 2008 Great Recession and kind of the Occupy Wall Street crowd with Freegans. Do you remember
Oh
Freegans?
yeah.
Yeah, that was big for me when I was like 17, 18, 19. And I don't think I ever lost that ethos. And at that time, there were lots of people living in cheap apartments in Baltimore where they didn't run the heat and they were just getting crates of rotted avocados from the Chinese markets and, whatever, living on like no money at all, eating dumpster bagels and going to the library and building bikes from garbage parts. And it's like, I think that's pretty cool because if you've got the kind of dynamism that America does have in the way of innovation and just sort of getting things done and generating wealth and prosperity, but you have a populace that is capable of living in a third world lifestyle and having the sort of third world loyalty and bonds and romantic social connections, then you actually have a country that sort of has the best of both worlds. Whereas if you let everybody take the wealth and prosperity to such a degree that they just sort of get a little lazy, they get a little sloppy, they're not as attuned to the things that are going on, to saving and scrimping and really the social element, because anytime I spent time with the campesinos from northern Mexico who live in mud huts in Sonora, some of them, on no money, these people their conception of friend loyalty, if they call you a friend, it means that they would take a bullet for you without thinking, you know. And I find that the more luxury a population has, the weaker their conception of friendship usually tends to be, and the less time they spend with their families, and the less likely it is on a Thursday night to walk through their neighborhoods. You're going to see everybody out on the porch playing music and eating together and talking to their neighbors and all this stuff. So I don't want that. I don't want the world where the AC's on in your house and all of your friends are just like sort of disposable drinking buddies, and your family isn't very important. I don't want to live like that, and I want America to be that way. But I don't think Americans are going for it. So what am I supposed to do? So
You gotta
I don't
kind
know.
of, I mean, you gotta kind of build it yourself. And this is sort of one of the, I don't know if irony is the right word, but like maybe it's a contradiction or contraindication is that although these technologies and this luxurious society we now live in, on the one hand, can put people in their AC cooled box and not talking to their neighbors and being isolated, atomized individuals. But on the other hand, the use of this technology, like I'm sitting here talking to you, and you live a 5 hour drive away from me, and we're good friends, and I'm coming to your wedding. And then I'm
Right.
sitting in my living room right now as one of my trucker buddies who's taken his day reset off, and he's got his tractor parked in my driveway. And
Great.
the people who you do like, and you can seek out these communities. And there's my wife will give me some crap about this sometimes because she thinks I spend way too much time socializing and talking to people online, and doing my own little writing projects and whatnot. But it's like, these are my people, man.
Right.
Unfortunately, we're
Right.
all spread all over the place. It is what
Right.
it is. But I know my neighbor behind me, Mark, the two ladies that just built the house down the road. Ride my bike around, stop in, say hi. There's as you put it, man, like there's something to having, you know, communal and social and friend bonds. And, God help us if the atomization goes on any further.
Well, and so something I've been thinking about lately that I think is pretty well related to what we're talking about now is I encountered this piece and I've talked to you about it about Wang Huning,
Oh yeah,
the the
I've
the
been reading.
communist.
Yeah, I've been
Yeah,
reading that. That what a great find. I actually have to get the book now. I'm totally entranced with this article you sent me. It's amazing.
yeah. I want to. I'm going to buy a copy of the book myself. The book is called America Against America, and it's written by a communist Chinese Communist Party apparatchik named Wang Huning, who's known in China as the quote gray eminence. He's like the master of puppets behind the entirety of the Chinese ideological party structure and economic reforms. And he diverges from orthodox Marxism in some critical ways that have really shaped China since the 90s. And so in 1988, he came to the United States for a period of 6 months, and kind of in the tradition of Alexis de Tocqueville's Democracy in America, where a foreigner comes to the U.S. and just writes what he's seeing. Huning wrote some pretty incisive critiques of American society at the time that were not particularly hyperbolic or over dramatized, or it didn't seem that he has an axe to grind by anybody I read who reviewed the book. And he says one of the things he says that I think has influenced me the most in recent days is that the technologies that we use, and this was in 1988, so it's only really intensified since then. The technologies that we use, the ATM machine, the copier, the microwave, the automobile, the computer, all these kinds of things, they're bureaucratized systems of rules that the user must obey in order to achieve the result that he wants, right? You can't go to the ATM machine and say, yeah, I don't remember my PIN number and I don't have my card, and hey, why don't you just do this favor for me? The ATM machine doesn't care because it's not a human being and there's no flexibility, so you have to obey its rules. And so that means that rules-based behavior is rewarded and programmed into the human spirit in a machine age society. And therefore, we're a regulatory society, and our conception of humanity is fundamentally machinic because of the machines that we're always interacting with. And so, I was thinking about this just yesterday and the day before. The romanticization of the 1950s, for example, which is so common and is almost inescapable in a lot of right-wing political circles, and even on the left in some cases. They really love this strong middle class. We're driving our cars fast. We're going to the hop. We're all buddies, and everybody gets together and they go bowling, but they've got cars and they've got refrigerators and such. We only romanticize that because it was a singular anomaly of an era where Americans had machines, but were not yet fundamentally machinic. And so we hadn't internalized the bureaucracy and the regulatory procedures of machines as our sole existential thrust. That would take a generation or two before that would actually come into play. But we still had our cars. We could still drive fast. And we still had all this stuff. But we were buddies. We were friends. We had families. We had babies. We did things. And now we're so obsessed with the cleanness of the technologist, the cleanness of the laboratory, the finely combed accountants' spreadsheets, right? Everything has to be clean and make sense. So now, but once you hit 30, you stop going out to the bars. And I'm going to wait to have children because that's messy and that's not clean and that's not technically rational. It doesn't make sense, right? So these things all fit in together. And I think I'll finally say on that point, too, that I think that's a lot of the resentment against recent immigrants from other countries in the United States, and whatever their economic impact, that's one thing. But I think that they see people who come from peasant farming communities here with big trucks and big houses, but they're all still friends and they all still have babies and they all seem to have a good time and they get together. We don't do that. The native born sons, that's already been bred out of us. We're living as machine people now. They're not. We see that and we say, boy, I don't like them boys. They're having more fun than me, you know. So there's these weird dynamics with machinic human beings and their ways of thinking and doing. I think it's major.
On the point about criticizing immigrants in that way, we have this machinic mentality, as you put it, and that's a great observation. I can't wait to dive into this book. But I wonder, some people like myself, I got no beef against anybody from anywhere. I consider myself fundamentally, a humanist, like in the good way, not the like stupid progressive secular way, but like an actual humanist. I like human beings. I have no time for racism or the HBD people and the Wignats. Like the I don't care. But material reality and wages and economics, there's a lot of people that sort of like myself are like, hey, is there a room here for these folks? What are we going to do with them? What's their impact on wage floors? People that use America as an ATM, they come here, they work, they take off, and it's like, okay, that's cool. I mean, it's good for you, but it makes my opportunities here go down, right? So there's that. The argument I have sort of against immigration is purely material, and I just wonder if that, to your mind, if the material argument is connected to the machinic sort of frame of thinking that's been imposed on us by all this technology we've grown around. And I'm sure you would agree, many people are fish in water that don't even know what water is. Like we just take it for granted that all this stuff is here. So do you think there's something to that argument? Like, what do you think?
Well, I mean, it's a very, very, very complicated issue because I think that the handlers, the elites, the ruling class, and so forth, they are not thinking about anything but how to keep the machine they've built, which is really a bureaucracy, how to keep it running. And when the birth rate is depressed, probably the birth rate is depressed because we have become machinic. As I was saying before, having children is messy. Sex is messy. Even the issue of, it was on Twitter the other day, a woman was talking about how she likes to go to the bars and be ravished by her husband when she's drunk and she comes home, and everybody said, wow, well, what about consent? And it's like, well, look, Nobody would have said that in 1956. They would have said, yeah, of course, she likes to have a few drinks and come home and make love to her husband, whatever, who cares, right? So now everybody's so bureaucratized because of the machine that they're not really having the children. But the elites don't care about solving that problem. They just say, well, let's find some people who have a lot of babies, and let's bring them in because we just need people to keep working and buying things so that we can just make our money, right? We need the cheap labor, and we need all this stuff. The native-born population, I don't know what's wrong with them, so we're just going to replace them, right? So that element of it is kind of sick and sad. But at the same time, there's a whole cottage industry, right? When I worked with the illegal immigrants as a traveler, I used to work for cash because I didn't have ID and I didn't have a bank account and I didn't have any way to get hired but to just show up wherever work was being handed out. And I wound up working with Mexicans a lot. They called me the white Mexican, you know. And I'll never forget a conversation with an old Mexican guy who was still out there picking dates. And he said, this is how it works. In Spanish, we're talking. He said, this is how it works. Um, a Democrat is in office and it's easier to get here. And we all get here. And then we come here and we make the money. And then a Republican is in office and then it's harder to get here and you're more likely to get deported. So the real point of this whole thing, he said, was they want us here, but then they want the cycle to turn so that when we're here, we don't raise hell for better wages or better working conditions, and they can just send us home if we create a problem in their well-oiled machine. So it goes back and forth. That's all it is. He said nobody wants to stop immigration. Nobody wants immigrants to come in and actually integrate into society. They want things as they currently are. This is the perfect system for them. For us, it's not so good, And so there's two dominant cultural modes of thinking about immigration that say, "Oh, we love you. Come in, come in, come in," even if we're welcoming people who are, MS-13 gangsters that have no good intentions. And then there's the other side of saying, "Oh, these people are animals. Shoot them all. Let them die in the desert." And it's like these are both totally disordered and incomplete, simplistic analyses that are really born of one psychological response to the situation or other. And yeah, I think the real thrust of the thing is to say, well, why do they have a higher birth rate than us? Why are they all getting together? What are they doing culturally that we used to do? And when we used to do it, our birth rate was higher and our elites didn't feel the need to ship in a group of foreigners to supplant us in the workforce and culturally. And a lot of that is going to come back down to the machinic conception of humanity that has come out of the era of factories and ATMs and microwaves and all sorts of things like that. I don't know if what I'm saying sounds kind of convoluted.
No, not at
But
all. It's very clarifying, and I mean, we're just shooting the breeze here, man. That's the whole point of this.
right,
Whatever way it goes, it goes. Anecdotal observation. I was in New York City this week. A friend of mine, Batya Unger Sargon, just released this book called Second Class, which is an examination of where the working class in America are at today.
right,
And there's some overlap in our discussion with what's going on in Botch's book. I was interviewed for it. Full disclosure, I'm in this book, so I got invited to her very tiny sort of book launch party thing. But anyway, I'm in New York. I go to her thing, and I'm sort of walking around New York with my wife and my kids. And my wife and I like to travel together and take our children and sort of treat them as adults in a way. We don't hide them from anything. So, you go online and say, I was walking down the street in Manhattan with my 4-year-old and 6-year-old, and some of these, people who are thinking that every city is Sodom and Gomorrah would probably freak out. Like, oh, what are you doing with that? But like, whatever.
right,
So we're wandering around New York, and like there's all these e-bikes, right? Like you like to talk about bikes and cheap, efficient travel, but there's the sort of like the flip side to it and how that technology gets used and where it sort of intersects with this sort of like machine luxury we live in, plus immigration. So there's just all of these e-bikes whizzing around New York City, and it doesn't matter where you go, Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens, they're
Yep.
everywhere. There's like millions of the things, and it's primarily two groups of people, Chinese and Guatemalans, and I guarantee you most of them haven't got working papers at all. And you try and like talk to these guys or be friendly or whatever, they might say hi or like look at you funny, but I'm assuming many of them don't speak English. And like they're just doing all the delivery stuff, your DoorDash, your whatever food delivery. And I think they've basically eliminated the bike courier, right? So back in the day, I had friends in Toronto that did this professionally. You ride your bike and you deliver documents and small packages and doodads for, all the banksters and corporate and government folks downtown. And like that's gone. I haven't seen a bike courier in ages, but it's just all these e-bike dudes running around all over the place in New York. And if you're not paying attention, you might get hit by one of them. When's the last time you went to New York City?
I haven't been to New York City since good grief. I don't even remember. It must have been October maybe.
Right, because
Something
your
like
your
that.
your mother was living there before her condition got worse, correct?
She's still living there. She's still living there.
Okay, I thought maybe she'd moved closer to where you grew up.
I've been hoping she would, but she basically told me that she loves New York City so much she'd die there. So there's nothing really that I can do about that because that's what she wants.
That's a
And
hot
her
take.
yeah, it's not a take you'd hear very often on our side of Twitter, but she loves it. So she lives down there, and I do go occasionally, but I don't go very often. Um, she comes up here more often than I wind up going down there because it's too expensive. You go down there and it's like you walk out the door and you go to the library and you get a cup of coffee and somehow you spent $40. You don't even know what you could have spent $40 on, but you did. It's like I that's frightening to me. I don't like that.
Yeah, we've been discussing your thrifty and marginal ways, and yeah, I wonder how all these Chinese and Guatemalan e-bike guys who are probably not getting paid very much, like how do they eke out their marginal existence in Gotham City?
Yeah, well, I mean, all I know is that across the street from my mother's apartment, there was a vacant lot about 8 years ago, and in all of about 18 months, they threw up a new hotel. And we were all glad for it because it's like, oh well, now when we come down here, we don't have to all cram into mom's tiny apartment. We could get a room across the street and it'd be all right. Well, it only operated as a normal apartment or a normal hotel for about 10 months because immediately the waves of immigrants started coming, and now it's just a full-blown immigrant shelter that the city pays full rate for every single apartment every night for years so that these guys can live there, because I think that they realized the price of real estate and rent fanning out around the city makes it so that the low wage labor that they require to keep the city operating, the commuting costs were making it a dismal prospect for normal low wage Americans to say, yes, I live in Newark and I commute from Newark every single day to work at Subway on West 4th in Manhattan. And so I think that they shipped a lot of these immigrants in, and then I think what they probably do is they cry about it in the media, even though they actually need them, so that they can keep getting emergency monies and emergency funds and drumming up all this kind of support. But if you look at the economics of it, they obviously need these people to do what they're doing because there's a big labor shortage, right? Is after COVID, big labor shortage. Nobody wants to commute from Camden, New Jersey to come work at Pret or whatever fast food chain, and they say, all right, bring these guys in. Um, it's working out for them in this really weird way where the streets are just choked with e-bikes doing their Instacart deliveries, and they can put these guys on lockdown at
Yeah.
night.
And it's such an interesting cycle because the taxpayer ends up paying for it, right? Like if you pay New York City taxes, it's going to the New York City government, who are now paying for these hotel come, immigrant reception centers where people live on the taxpayer dime, right? Like
Yeah, yeah.
you're paying for this no matter what, and like it's the whole cycle there is just so bizarre to me, and then people want to make these esoteric arguments about free market versus New York's a communist shithole or whatever, and like man, it just none of it makes any sense, and trying to sort of disentangle the whole story and have it make sense is just extremely difficult.
A phrase that I have liked employing and have seen around recently that I think is relevant here is the idea of America as a factory. America is a factory. It's a place to make money. It's not a place to live. And so when you've allowed the economic forces that came out of World War II, really, to sort of metastasize in the 80s with deregulation and all this sort of stuff, and then to blow into this gigantic thing with the digital revolution and the dot-com boom and the Enron thing, and then it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, right? So now we're living in this weird world where we never demobilized after World War II, as Wendell Berry has pointed out, I think. We turned the country into a place where you make money, where you don't actually want to live. And then we're shocked that people come here to make money. You know what I mean? And it's very, and then we're shocked that our own people don't actually reproduce at a rate that could sustain the factory that we've built. And so all of these internal contradictions are built into the way things are, to where even if you built the wall and deported them all, we would have all kinds of problems, right? Unless there was a corresponding cultural renaissance of sort of saying, yeah, we have to we can't live like machines. We have to have a romantic sensibility about life where we have fun and we go out to dance and we hang out with our neighbors and we fall in love. And when we fall in love, we got pregnant just after we got married. So what? Now, if you do that, people will think you're crazy. They'll think you're weird. If you're in your 20s and you get married at the age of 24, 25, and then you have a baby the following year, you're either a super poor person or like rich or something, right? A normal person doesn't do this anymore. So we have to fix the birth rate problem. And all of these problems, they metastasize on one another. And there's no, it's like with pollution and ecology. If there's two types of pollution in a river, like for at least within a certain domain, right? There's point source pollution and non-point source pollution. So if I test the water upstream of Gord's cattle farm and it's clean, and then downstream of it, it's full of all sorts of nasty chemicals, and then I audit your farm and find that you're using those exact nasty chemicals, I know that Gord's farm polluted the river, and I can say, you got to stop doing that. But if I test the water upstream and it's clean, and then I find all the nasty chemicals way down the way, but there's 80 farms along the way, I can't really come after anybody in particular. And it's a little more nebulous of a problem to solve. And I think that's where our problems are as a country today. There's no finger to point in any one direction. You could point at the Federal Reserve, you could point at immigration, you could point at technology, you could point at the decline of religion, but these things all actually sort of work together, and nobody in particular is responsible for them all as they work together. And so it's just a quagmire, like
Yeah.
I don't know what to do with it. I
Yeah,
have
no,
no idea what to do with it.
no, most people don't. I mean, we can try and figure it out, but yeah, the sort of diffusion of responsibility and accountability for how all of this works is I think it's as they say, it's a feature, not a bug, right? Like
Right.
how this system is constructed. There's been lots of discourses. The point of a system is what it does, and I think there's a little bit of truth to that. Something you mentioned about the whole, having to bring all these people in for low wage jobs, whatever, keep the system going. I'm thinking I was reading a book recently by a guy from here in Ithaca, actually, named Kirkpatrick Sale. It's called Rebels Against the Future, and it's about the Luddites, right?
Mm.
And this, the first wave of industrial revolution as it came to central and northern England. And what was the term? There was like the whole enclosure movement, which preceded this, where all the peasants were told to get lost, and then the industrial revolution comes on, and then everybody comes to work in the cities. And I just wonder if, like, people talk about the sort of fourth industrial revolution now with like AI, large language models. Jobs are being automated away. My job might get automated away here with trucks soon. I just wonder if this whole system we're living in here in the US now is just sort of like a new version of that first industrial revolution, but like with the diffusion of responsibility and the inability to point out one single factor that you can adjust to fix it all. And people do it willingly. Like, I mean, there are some edge cases of indentured servitude arrangements when you bring people to the US and Canada, especially in the trucking business. I'm sure it happens in a few others as well, but it seems like most people are just like willingly, like, hey, it's time to leave Guatemala and go live with the gringos. Like, nobody's forcing these Guatemalans to do it, or Chinese, or whoever. And I think there was more force involved in previous iterations of this sort of societal wide problem.
Yeah. 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 I think that's largely true. I mean, there's definitely a shocking amount of indenturement that goes on, or functional indenturement, when like you have cartel debts down in Nicaragua or something, and then there's no way that you could pay it, but really by sneaking over the Rio Grande into Texas and working your way up. There is a lot of that, but no, it's just a lot of people. They want to come here. They make their money. Some of them want to stay, but a lot of them don't. A lot of them, I mean, remittances. If remittances were considered their own wing of the financial industry, I think it's like the third largest amount of monetary transfers of any industry in the United States every year. Just billions of dollars being sent to countries all over the world with no taxes. I mean, there's fees that Western Union collects, and they make a lot of money doing it. But yeah, there's a lot of strange things that go on with some of that stuff. And I don't know. I have said before, and I've ruffled people's feathers when I said it, that all the gringos who are tired of living in a continent-sized HOA, where you get a ticket if you don't mow your lawn, and you got to register your car, and you get your insurance, and everything's a hassle, and everything's illegal. The gringos who are sick of that, they can go to Latin America, and all of the Latin Americans who say, "Yeah, I want to drive a Denali and have a 3,000 square foot air conditioned, McMansion on the outskirts of San Antonio, come on up," right? So we're just going to switch. Like the real Americans are going to have to leave America if they want to keep being Americans, maybe. you know, and of course this ruffles people's feathers, because they like to imagine that we don't have to do that sort of thing, and that this country can be fixed. But I'm not sure that it can. I think that these, and I have to say, a lot of, at the risk of making myself seem really crazy, I was an anarchist for a decade, and I had left-leaning sensibilities for a long time, and I was an academic about it. I mean, I've actually read Marx's Das Kapital in its entirety with the David Harvey notes,
right? And I've read all these different economic leftist theories, and I have to say the core thrust of them ultimately produces a bad result. But the analysis is interesting when Marx identifies internal contradictions to the capitalist system. He's not wrong about this. There are many contradictions to this system that are inherently unstable and will generate results that will just shock any conservative who clings onto a specific iteration of this system. The system's just going to keep changing like a headless beast to serve the ends of those who control it and who benefit most from it. And what are you going to really do about it? There's not really a whole lot to do about it, unless you want to start lining people up against the wall, which of course Marx advocated for. But you can see revolution is as corrosive of a force as the technological contradicting underpinnings of the capitalist system. So I don't think revolution's the answer either. So when right-wing people talk about, the boogaloo, civil war and all this sort of stuff, it's like, you're just as bad as the communists. Grow up. You don't want this. Talk to somebody who lived in former Yugoslavia and was there when it all went down, and you may find very quickly that you don't want the things you're asking for. So at the end of it, what is there to do? I don't want to really be a fatalist, but basically our options are to sort of hide out and live that outlaw style life, or to leave. And those are the options, realistically speaking, if you want to extricate yourself from the problem and possibly articulate a vision that could succeed outside of this headless beast of a system. I don't even think the route of saying, I need to up my SAT grades and go to Harvard and start brushing elbows and get into high halls of politics and power and get rich as a financier and all this stuff and sort of create this new elite. I think there's a lot on the right who are talking about doing that. I don't even think that that's particularly possible either, because to be elite in this system, your own prerogatives have to be aligned with whatever the basis of your elite status is, which is the status quo. You will be forced to adopt the status quo. And you've seen it with, a radical dreaming of the stars type leftists who got into politics and then just sort of became machine apparatchiks. And you've seen it with people on the right too, where they just sort of get co-opted into this thing that's so much bigger than them. So at the end of the day, the real war is spiritual. And I think a lot of people think that's a form of escapism, but I don't think it is. I mean, for white men in my age demographic, suicide is the number one cause of death. And so we have to articulate a spiritual, metaphysical, ontological vision of human life that counters that. And we basically have to fight no holds barred against that force. The machinic conception of humanity that's embedded in the society that we're living in is driving us to madness. It will drive our children to madness if we're not exceedingly judicious and vigilant. And forgive me if I go to Tierra del Fuego in an effort to protect my children from it. But I do think, though, that there's a lot to be said for if groups of people, not individual families or individual people, but groups of people all collectively go outlaw mode in places where it is difficult for the long arm of the law to reach them. There is something to be said for that, whether you're in the United States or Canada or continental Europe or whatever. You talk a lot about living north of 60 in Canada and how that's it's almost like a different country in a way that is more Canadian than, the greater Toronto area, because it's less polluted, right? And I think there's a lot of parts of the United States that are this way
Right.
as well. So
Yeah, the only problem with the marginal areas or the remote areas is that a lot of the people that are around usually work for the government. So
I know. You're right about that.
You go to a place like Yellowknife, which is, roughly 23,000 people, and half that town are government employees, man. Like 50% of them work for either the territorial government, the feds, or they work
Yeah.
for some agency that's like part of, mining or managing the natives or the native bureaucracy. Like, as much as it's great to, get out there and live in, the Northwest Territories or Wyoming, half the people you bump into are servants of the entity you're trying to escape and live apart from. So
I'm sure of that.
we have to
Yeah.
do that. We have to do this dance. Um, so you mentioned spiritual revolution, and since our last two discussions, you were on my show talking about living in place, where you are now on the north side of the Adirondacks, and then we had Joey and James on to talk about living rough and hitchhiking, and that was all fun. And since that last show we did, you and I got to meet in person, and a spiritual revolutionary was the reason we met up. We got to meet Paul Kingsnorth.
Right.
I don't know if referring to Mr. Kingsnorth as a spiritual revolutionary is necessarily the right way to categorize him. However, I think he's in agreement with us that like Paul, there's no answer in politics. The system's
No.
doing what it's doing, and the only way to escape this is probably internal, which is to say, as our buddy Jr. might say, we got to get right with God.
Yeah.
Whatever you conceive that to be. I mean, you're a Catholic. Mr. Kingsnorth is an Orthodox Christian. I'm still a free agent, as it were. I don't know where I'm at yet, but um, that road trip we made between Madison and Story, Wyoming, and I had the very distinct pleasure of getting to hear you and Mr. Kingsnorth go back and forth about this in this rental minivan. Wow, that was something else. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about that conversation, such as you remember it, and what your take is on such spiritual revolutionaries as Paul and others sort of writing in that space.
Well, the main thing that I took from meeting Mr. Kingsnorth in person was that I had not totally clearly understood or articulated the diametric opposition between God and the machine. And he uses the term the machine. And this is why I'm riffing so much on this Wang Huning thing where he's talking about machines as well, because it fits, and so I find it interesting. And I think a lot of what Kingsnorth has done in his life is try to think things through such that you take them to the logical conclusion of the ideas that you're considering without being dramatic or without being excessively neurotic and calculating, but to sort of say, well, in a machine, it's a product of the human rationality and will. It is an amplification of the human will, and there is a sort of idea encoded into machine thinking that would have you imagine that human beings are in control, the human will is in control, and humans are capable of knowing all things, even if they're not individually. The collective sum total of us can sort of create this avatar of all human knowledge, which the internet roughly approximates, and artificial generalized intelligence really takes to its most extreme expression. But of course, if you entertain that from the religious point of view, and you imagine that the fall of man may be a truthful formulation, and that the human will is naturally going to warp in a bad direction, where it's going to do the wrong thing unless it self-abnegates and sacrifices, such as one finds in true love, be it brotherly love or romantic love or what have you. The logical conclusion of the machine, as expressed in AI or AGI, would really be a demon. It would really be the Antichrist, which I know is sort of, that's an expression you hear from crazy people on the street saying that the end is near. And I'm not necessarily saying that the end is near, because I do think that it is inevitable that this mega amplification of the collective human will cannot become totalizing. And I think the only way that I can say that is by adopting a religious perspective which holds it to be true that thousands of years of human religious tradition wasn't a bunch of stupid people engaging in ridiculous superstitions, but that they were actually speaking something that was true, and that ultimately the thing that's true is the opposite of AI and the internet and the machine, which is a romantic conception of life. And I don't just mean romantic in the sense of, yes, I read Jack Kerouac and I thought it was so great and inspiring. I mean the the conception of human life that holds love at the center, that says, I don't care how much money I have or whether my machines break or whether I'm in control. I'm not in control. The only thing that I can do with my agency that will not naturally amplify my fallen will and produce a negative result spiritually, is to love. And what is love? Like, what's the logical conclusion of love? It's laying down your life for your brother. It's living a life of sacrifice, a life of simplicity, and extricating yourself from systems in which the anti-love tendencies of the human will are amplified and constitute a totality, or a seeming totality. I think it's really a sham, and it really can't last, because because Christ wins in the end. But I think that's a lot of, these are the kinds of thoughts that came out of those interactions. And I was not able to say it quite so on the nose, or to think about it with as much thoroughness prior to meeting Mr. Kingsnorth and having all the discussions we got to have in Wyoming.
Sometimes you remember things and the memory sort of becomes a feeling rather than specifics and details. And the great American road trip, as it were, with America's number one marginal lifestyle hitchhiker guy, yourself, and this man Paul, who's now being sought out. There's a woman named Barry Weiss who used to work for the New York Times, and she started this new thing called the Free Press, and she's got a podcast, and she got Paul on here recently. I got to go listen to that, but I have people back home in Canada ask me to try and hook them up with Paul to get him on their shows. And he's very sought after, which I think indicates to me that, like, people know, like, at least a small number of people who are intelligent and who've been through the ringer with the media, like Barry Weiss or my friend Trish back in Canada, and they know something's up, right? I think people understand that, like, this machine age we're living in, contradictions, anti-human, doesn't allow for the sort of fullness of love and the richness of the human experience to even, be allowed to play out anymore, and I think Paul's writing speaks to that, again, from a sort of, like, he's recently converted to Orthodox Christianity, and he has a particular a view of where religious and spiritual thinking meet up into all of this. But, like, I'm just sort of fascinated by it all myself, in that, as I said when we were out west, that, like, I've gone through this my own weird journey trying to figure out, like, what the hell's going on here, especially downstream of COVID and all of the things that have gone on. And, I used to be a pretty weirdo libertarian, paid way too much attention to politics and tried to figure it out that way. But all the answers that came from analyzing politics and political thinking, they're just empty. There's just nothing there. And I don't know that any major political party or political thinker, regardless of who they're aligned with, has any answers for us. I just don't. It's not there. I don't know if is God the answer. Maybe. Again, full disclosure, I am not a religious person, and I never have been. But it strikes me that people who are approaching it in that way have more substantial critiques and substantial possible solutions for us than anybody else.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in short, there's two sort of points that I think I reached in my own path where I started out as an anarchist punk dropout. I mean, I like full disclosure, I'm not some holier than thou religious person. I used to be a professional shoplifter. Like I used to black out and raise hell and get in fights and get drunk and go state to state and living like an animal. And I didn't care about anything. And my motivation was death. I wanted to see the system fail.
The
Uh, and,
ultimate, the
and I,
ultimate nihilist. Yeah.
the ultimate nihilist. I didn't care about anything, and of course, that where does that take you? Like it doesn't take you anywhere good. And so I think I sort of come to realize that one, man is a naturally religious creature. No, if you take away religion, which has been the dominant force in the lives of men since the dawn of time in one way or another until very recently. I mean, the idea of a non-religious society where most people say that they are nothing in particular religiously, or they don't really believe in anything or whatever, this is an extreme novelty. And so with that, man's religious impulse has not gone away. And where it appears that he is that the modern man has developed a political attachment to something or a psychological attachment to something, in actual fact, it is very often a spiritual attachment to something. It isn't just that the modern man clings to his air conditioner and his SUV as a baby clings to his blanket. If you wanted to sort of take a sort of patronizing Freudian read, um, it's actually a spiritual thing, because the fruits of human rationality produced his machines, and every conceivable problem could be solved. Just as my room is too hot and it takes me long to walk from town to town, now I've solved these through the collective human will of rationality and technological procedure. Now I have a nice ice cold room and I can zip to the other town in 5 minutes, where before it would have taken me 2 hours to walk there. You say, wow, I have faith in this because it's results. If you believe in God, you won't see results all the time. And when you do, they may be very subtle, right? And so people have this results. Man is a naturally religious creature, and he has a spiritual attachment to the machines around him, and to the machinery of his own ideas. Um, and the proof is sort of in the pudding, right? Where if you look at the fruits of air conditioning and you look at the fruits of the automobile, there's proof there. Where religious proof is a little more delicate and often absent, and you have to sort of run on faith alone. Um, and I think that's difficult for modern man to process. Um, and so with that, yeah, I don't know. I think it's difficult for a lot of people to allow for religious conclusions to percolate into them because of that. I lost it, and I'm a little destabilized by the no video, because I was looking at you and now I'm not looking at you.
All
So
right, I can turn it
anyway,
back on. Hold on. I'll fire it back up.
it's odd. Yeah. Anyway,
There you go.
sorry. What was the initial question that you had even asked, or the thought that you had presented
Well,
prior to when I started talking?
I mean, it was sort of about your observations about Paul Kingsnorth's writing, and where this sort of spirit, the sort of problems we're facing being not being solvable by politics, but then Paul's critique of the machine as such, where it intersects with yours, and like where a sort of like religious or spiritual framework or approach might help.
Yeah. Right. So yeah, man is a naturally religious creature. It's ineluctable. He's going to employ a religious mode of thought about almost anything that he does. But the danger is when he's doing that in the modern context and not calling it religion, right? And sort of saying, well, yes, I'm a Democrat. That's not a religion. Nobody thinks of that as a religion, but it's fundamentally religious. It
Yeah.
involves a certain degree of faith, and it's exploited by people who benefit from these different secular systems, and the order that they propose. You know, and so by becoming religious, you're taking ownership of an inevitable psycho-spiritual process that is more or less inescapable by all human beings. Whereas if you are quote unquote not religious, you're still going to think religiously because it's human nature to do so, but somebody else will be able to intervene in that process for their own benefit and almost hack you uh, in a psycho metaphysical sort of way. And I think that's what we see where secular people will develop a sacramental relationship with certain practices and ideas. This is I get in trouble all the time on the internet because people will say, oh well, you're counter signaling, or oh well, what you just said is lib coded, it's left coded. And it's like, look, my ideas are rooted in my faith, and my faith is so much older than any of these weird dramas that I don't need to worry about what's coded. I can freely think and root my thought in Christ and his church, right? This is not hard for me to do.
Well,
Whereas modern,
when people make that accusation, pardon the interruption, it sounds to me
sure,
like you get this from sort of people on the left. I started at least hearing this term 20 years ago, and it's probably even older, but it's still sort of part of the modern political vernacular. Dog whistles, right?
yeah,
So when someone on the right accuses you of being like, oh, that's lib coded, well, what the libs do is they say to right wing people, oh, you're making a dog whistle. And
right,
to all of these people, I say the only beings which can hear dog whistles are other dogs, and most
right,
dogs spend a lot of time sniffing each other's asses, right?
right,
So like
right.
just keep on marching. And as you said, your faith is so much older, and it's built on an understanding of humanity and the human condition that's timeless. So yeah, don't worry about any of that crap, man. Like those of us who see what you're doing understand. Like
Yeah. And I would even say, because I've dismissed these criticisms before and sort of said that the whole coding or dog whistle or whatever thing it's a lot like the high school lunchroom politics, but it's even worse than that, because imagine the high school lunchroom where there's the cool kids table and there's different tables and there's all these weird hierarchies that are sort of arbitrary. Imagine that a high school lunch period started and never ended for thousands of years, and they developed cargo cults about different things about, well, you put your peas with your pizza on the plate in this fashion, or you drink chocolate milk, or you drink white milk, or whatever. Yeah, I mean, it's a sort of ridiculous metaphor, but that's sort of what it is, because not only is it just the sociology of in group, out group, but it's sacramentalized into this sort of quasi-religious force where if I don't say we should let children starve to death on the US-Mexico border, or sorry, not starve to death, but die of thirst in the desert on the US-Mexico border, then I'm not right-wing. And actually, I'm a communist. Okay, like this is clearly ridiculous to any thinking human being, but when you're in it, you're no different than a wide-eyed mystic on the streets of Calcutta who believes that Vishnu has driven you to rise from your bed this morning and raise your arms in the air all day, every day for years, right?
Man,
That's how it is.
I want to give some credit to a certain type of person that might be dismissed as kind of being, a hippie or like an Eastern fetishizer or whatever. But a really good friend of mine who's probably going to listen to this show, his name is Andrew. I'm actually trying to convince him to come to your wedding too. He lives not far from you.
Great.
He's been to India a bunch. He's sort of like one of these guys. He used to have dreadlocks. He was a DJ, go to Goa, party, whatever. But he made some very good observations about life in India. And, like we talk about the timelessness of religious or spiritual thinking and the things that can be taught through these traditions about, the human condition. And there's these guys in India that like keep lighting candles on the side of the Ganges for these various ceremonies, and there's a lineage of these guys that have been doing the same thing for dozens, if not hundreds, of generations, like well before Christ.
Right.
And the Western mind, especially the machine-addled mind, would look at like these holy men in India and be like, what the hell are these guys doing? But there's something to it, right? It's an expression, this practice that it could be India, it could be Tibetan Buddhists, it could be any number of these things, but like there's something to that. They're not sitting on the side of the Ganges lighting candles in continual perpetuity for no reason. There's some there,
And this buttresses well with the second thing that I was trying to say earlier, and I forgot what it was, is this sort of central question, I think, in our era, if you really want to take the bird's eye view and look at it as broadly as possible, is the question of, does metaphysics exist or not? Is the world purely material and therefore gray matter to be pushed and pulled by human rationality and will, which, if there is no metaphysics, is probably perfectible to some degree, or could be improved upon. And if this is the case, then if you keep building machines and all this stuff is inevitable, and we're going to be downloading our brains onto computers and shipping them to Pluto in no time, or whatever people sort of think. Or metaphysics exists, and there is an extra physical reality that does not occupy the material sphere, and perhaps it's slow to move, perhaps its movements are cryptic, perhaps its logic defies the logic of a purely rational thinking, machinic, materialistic type person. That's the question, right? And I think about it as a writer, because people sort of say, well, how are you going to get into writing in the age of AI? And I say, look, all AI is doing is copying and regurgitating the sentence structure of writing that's already been done.
You can see it a mile away, though, right? Like, I have had the discussion about, using the large language model programs to facilitate writing efficiency. I know a writer who has admitted that he uses these programs and puts in all the correct inputs. It spits something out at him. Then he goes and re-edits it and makes it sound more human.
Right.
But he only does it for like specific stuff. Like, this guy writes about all kinds of different things. And like, I think he understands, and I understand, and anybody that like pays attention to this stuff, you can see the fake shit from a mile away if you're paying attention. And a lot of my friends, even like my fellow truck drivers that like hang out on Twitter, they put in these prompts, and the images keep getting better and better since this technology has come out. The images, like if you want some kind of AI driven art, it gets better and better, but in being better and it in being almost perfect, that like the computer did it, right?
Yeah.
And this ties back into what I was saying about the popularity of guys like Kingsnorth is like people understand that we're missing something in the warp drive hyperspace speed at which this stuff is moving. For lack of a better word, the reaction against it is also moving very quickly because, like,
Right.
if you're a human connected to your own spirit and you're looking around at this stuff, like, it's fake. Like,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
there's not the like sort of red blood involved in it. Oh, no, I'm sorry, I'm ranting, but
No, I think it makes sense. I mean, the difference, like, I could take everything I've ever written, put it into, a computer program that could spit out new things, and I could tell it to write an article about, whatever topic I chose, and it would, but it would seem to work. But if then I stopped writing, and then the machine could only use things that it wrote and copy and amalgamate the things that it wrote ad infinitum, eventually you would be getting nonsense, because I have a soul. I exist metaphysically. The machine does not. And so, that's sort of the thing is you take nuclear bombs and artificial intelligence and gene editing and neural implants and things of that nature, and you're actually channeling, a sort of again a sort of demonic imperative of, do what thou wilt. From a rational machinic perspective, Christ, as a rational actor, should have looked upon his own persecution and crucifixion as a ridiculous thing, and he should have armed himself and taken off into the desert and disappeared to some other corner of the world, and lived a comfortable life, maybe hiding out in India or something, right? Like, this is what a modern man would do, but he did not do that. He fulfilled his divine intervention in the sin of all of humanity for all time. And that doesn't make any sense to a modern person, because the modern person, uh, tacitly at least, denies the existence of metaphysics, denies the existence of the soul, and just sort of thinks in material terms. And consequently, the modern non-religious person is the most depressed person in the world, in all of human history. I mean, unless there's some grave anthropological error in all that I've studied and read about pre-industrial cultures, um, that's the case. Is these You judge a tree by its fruit, right? And the fruit seems to be suicide, anxiety, depression, pharmaceuticals, transgenderism, mass shootings, and just an absolutely delirious cultural and political climate, where human life doesn't matter at all, sex doesn't matter at all, the reproduction doesn't matter at all, and beauty doesn't matter at all. And this can't stand. How could this
no,
continue? How could it continue?
no, it can't. And it the it's become this whole milieu, this whole way of thinking that allows for all this. It's interesting how it has its own internal defense mechanisms. Like, if you criticize any or all of this or any aspect of it, like, you get cast off as some kind of reactionary. And you mentioned issues with people transitioning, and like, man, biological reality. If you say there's man and there is woman, you're in for a world of trouble in some parts of our society.
Right.
And whatever. I'm not gonna sit here and attack somebody who's fallen prey to this or honestly believes them to be that which they are not. Whatever, buddy. I'm not gonna attack you. I'm not gonna do anything, and nobody should. But we don't have to accept this as some sort of positive that needs to be celebrated.
Well, and the odd thing about it, I think, is that it's a lot of times the way that evil works is it is a mirror image of truth, except it perverts it, right? Where somebody that is a materialist, non-religious, atheist, doesn't believe in God, they may believe that there is an essential self that was born in a male body that actually is a woman. But they will be very specific and say, well, I don't believe in a soul. And say, well, what do you believe in then? Because you clearly believe that there is some metaphysical component that exists outside the body that is attached to the self, right? And so that's sort of the thing, right? Is, I don't know. You see it all the time. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Um, they're selling a version of the soul and a version of metaphysics in which somebody still maintains spiritual psychological control, whereas the ultimate divine metaphysics, God is in control and no human being is in control. And people are very uncomfortable with that. And yet it's the people who trust that God is in control and that there is a metaphysical soul attached to the human body who very often outlast to the bitter end in the worst civilizational circumstances, or even groups of Muslims in sub-Saharan Africa, who they're underfunded, they have few weapons, they have few tools, and yet they seem to be remarkable in their ability to punch way above their weight with conventional Western militaries. Why is that? Because they don't believe in God. Because they don't believe that they're in control. They believe that they are doing God's work. And that is like an implacable human psychological disposition. Whether what they're doing is right or wrong, which is really another question, that basic framework spiritually of human action and thought leads to a level of power that freaks out the people who are building a controlled materialist empire. They can't have divided loyalties. They don't want us to care more about God than shopping and paying our taxes and showing up for work. They don't want us to care more about our families than shopping and paying taxes and going to work. They don't want us to care more about our friendships and our tribal loyalties than shopping and paying taxes and going to work, right? So it's all part of a systematic reduction of the human being into being a cog in the social machine, in the social technological machine, which is not a comforting thought. So
No, and the I've said this before, the people that are into machine thinking and secularity, material reality with like no consideration for the metaphysics, I have to admit I have not taken the leap of faith to like buy into a lot of metaphysical claims. Like I sort of understand that there is this realm in the human spirit somewhere inside you, the divine. I still struggle with like getting off the like materialist bus, but you know the secularists and the atheists who do not believe in the metaphysics, they've just transferred their belief system to the state and to the machine,
right,
right?
right.
I mean, you mentioned this in a different way earlier, and you know, I remain I remain an atheist about all things. I don't believe in the machine. I don't believe in the government. Why should I? What loyalty do they give to me?
Right.
What meaning do they offer me? In fact, they're corrosive to it. They're corrosive to my family. They're corrosive to my success. All the
Right.
government's ever done to truck drivers is fuck them over. Why do I have to
Right.
buy? Why do I have to buy into this thing? Why do I have to like accept the secular vision? Why do I have to like go and vote for some political party? Like, no,
Right.
man. Like even if I have not made the leap of faith and accepted Jesus or Yahweh or whoever, the the deep and timeless framework provided to us by God or divinity or whatever your conception of that is. Um, God didn't put an ELD in my truck. God didn't try and make me God didn't try and make me compete with indentured servants from the Punjab.
Right.
God didn't, put a 25% interest rate on my credit card. Um, God doesn't make me redo my hazmat certification every 3 years. For what point, nobody knows.
Right.
The spiritual realm has never done anything negative to me. So
Right.
when we have all of this proof around us that the machine, that politics, that this extremely new architecture we've constructed around us, that is new in the human experience, you know, as much as it's benefited us in material ways, it's also been a huge pain in the ass. And
Yeah.
God's never done anything bad to me. Why
Right.
wouldn't I believe in God? Right? It
Right.
doesn't matter. Like you can say, oh, ha, ha, you believe in Sky Daddy. There's no proof of it. Okay, there might not be any proof to your material mind, but I have all the proof in the world that the stuff you guys believe in has fucked me over. So
Well, right. Right.
why would I not choose the option of something that's got a basis that's older than all of us and has not imposed all this garbage on my life, right?
Well, and you think of the sort of logical conclusion of materialism, which is this idea that of like brains in a vat, like if love is just a series of chemicals firing in the synapses of the brain, then they should be able to put me under complete anesthesia and stimulate my brain in those manners, and that should be no different than the love of a couple that has spent 70 years together and would die for each other, right? And intuitively, the human being realizes that you have to put a level of faith in very recent philosophical developments and technological developments, um, that would really make any devout religious person blush to believe that. That it requires more faith to be a materialist atheist in our era than it requires to have faith in God. Literally, that seems to be the case as far as I'm able to tell. And um because it's true that if you bring certain ideas forth to a modern secular non-religious person, many things are haram. Many things are not, they're not okay. You can't tell a secular non-religious liberal that I'm evading my taxes. You might as well tell a priest that you've just gone to the brothel. They're going to respond just as negatively, right? And
Yep.
why? If the world is a series of adaptational, evolutionary, material phenomena, me paying my taxes doesn't really benefit me because my vote doesn't matter. So it's taxation without representation. What do I get for my taxes relative to a Swede or relative to a Bosnian or a Paraguayan? What do I get for it? I'm not sure, right? So if I evade it, what moral basis do you have to stand on? And it all comes down to sort of social contract theory and all this sort of thing. And it's like, listen, the liberal project, and I mean liberal in the sense of classical liberal, is the reduction of all subjects and phenomena to legal phenomena, right? Is why does a birth certificate look quite like a title for a boat or an automobile, right? Because we have reduced these things to legal objects, which they interact with one another in a system, but that system has nothing to do with the natural human being, and it has nothing to do with the soul. So if you believe in the soul, you're sort of believing in something that it runs contrary to the liberal legal system, and that freaks them out, right? So it's no different than walking into a mosque and saying, well, everything you're doing is ridiculous because Allah doesn't exist and Muhammad was a liar, right? If you say that, everybody's going to freak out. And you know, you walk into the town board meeting and you say all of your deeds and birth certificates and everything that you believe in is for nothing and doesn't matter. They're going to freak out, you know?
Yeah. And on that note, the liberal project of putting deeds on things, something the modern mind, the modern machinic mind, as you put it, it desires and thrives on easy categorization, right?
Right.
Which I think is part of the reason why you catch a certain amount of flack for the things you post online in your writings, is because you kind of defy it a little bit, like a lot actually. And
Yeah.
you know, in my own life, I've kind of bounced around philosophically and with politics and stuff, as we all do. And you know, when you start being someone who's not easily put into a camp, it makes people upset almost, because it's not, you're having to make them work. You're having to make their minds do and consider things that they normally don't when you rock up and start speaking in the manner that you do, or you know, you question the machine categorization of everything. And you know, if you talk to a hyper political person that can only think in these terms, right? So let me share a little anecdote. The other evening, I go to this brewery sort of restaurant type thing in Ithaca, and I get yapping with some guys about trains. So I'm sitting at the bar, minding my own business. The guy next to me and two of his friends are talking about trains. Cool. As you do when you're at a bar, you're being convivial, enjoying the company of your fellow humans, you pipe up. So I started talking about trains with them. And no problem, just trains and logistics, you know, very basic, non-controversial topic. One of these guys hears my accent, clocks up that I'm Canadian, and starts asking me questions about Canada. I respond negatively about the current government there. And then somehow the conversation got, not by me, I didn't encourage this, but like someone asked me about the Freedom Convoy stuff, which is kind of my wheelhouse. And I started talking about that. And this other person like immediately started getting their back up because they were on the opposite side of it. They were a Branch Covidian, wear your mask, take your shots, do what you're told. And I'm sitting here at this bar as a stranger he doesn't know, defending something he's been told by the media he consumes that is bad.
Is he an American and not a Canadian?
An American guy. Yeah, an American guy who has been told by American media, which was fed by Canadian media, that Ottawa was surrounded by these fascist truckers and they were beating people in the streets and it was all violent and just like January 6th and the lies. So anyway, this guy immediately gets his back up. And, you know, I'm trying to be sort of like diplomatic and talking here because I can tell, because this person got their back up like really quickly. And you could tell the social milieu of our discussion had changed direction merely because this guy like couldn't deal with the fact that this friendly dude who was just talking about trains is now talking about something that's coded as bad. Like he just immediately went off the rails. And so I tried to like bring it back down. And then, you know, I'm like, well, you know, there's been some bad things that have happened in Canada. And, you know, I was explaining some of the lawfare stuff. And then like he calmed down a little bit. But like, I could tell that this person was having trouble placing me because in his brain, Canadian equals good, but Freedom Convoy supporter bad, but not really saying anything that's untrue. So like I was short circuiting this guy, which is part of the reason he was having a frustration. And he ended up sort of at the end of it, like he sort of like politely agreed with me about a few things and bid me a good evening. And but for a little while there, because I was straddling both sides of these lines that exist in his mind, it really upset him. And you could see it happening in real time. And it's like, we're humans. We don't have to be categorized in these simplistic ways. It doesn't have to be that way.
Right. 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 And I find situations like that offensive just intuitively, only for the fact that, if somebody from another country talks about their country to me, I'm not going to have any pretensions about knowing better than them, right? Because that's just the default code of respect. I don't care if you're Congolese or Belgian or Canadian or Uruguayan or whatever you are. I might have heard some things, but I think it is right to sort of say, well, I'm going to trust the guy who's actually from there over whatever I've heard. But in order to even think that thought, you have to step outside of the liberal, everything is legal and categorizable thing, because basically the machinic conception of humanity that has emerged since World War II, and really, one could argue has emerged since the Age of Enlightenment in continental Europe, um, which was really the origin of machine culture. Um, you're in a world of categories, and the categories interact with each other quite like a machine does, and so therefore you're always at work. You're always in the machine. When you're at the bar, you're not at a bar with fellow subjects. You're at a social factory which exists to reify your conception of how everything is categorized, right? Um,
Wow,
and that's
there's a quote. We have to there's a quote,
yeah,
dude.
yeah. That's not a purely original thought. I think that's some of like Baudrillard and some of the like critical theory people, like situationist type people that I've read over the years have sort of used the phrase social factory, but I think it's totally apt. Um, and to just interact as a subject is a soft thing that is not a category in and of itself. An object is categorizable, right? I can hold up my cell phone or the books that are near me or the cup that is near me, and I can say, well, that's a glass cup as opposed to a ceramic cup and this sort of thing. But if I have an individual in front of me, I understand that the individual has consciousness, right, and has his own perspective, and he has a soul, right? And if I say, well, um, he doesn't have a soul because I don't believe in souls, and if I adopt the sort of patronizing Marxist line of, oh, well, he might be suffering from false consciousness in that, like a black Republican. A black man can verily he can gain the perspective of being a Republican if he so wishes. In fact, I talked to a black man in Buffalo a year ago who worked at the train station. He said desegregation was the worst thing that ever happened for my people. And it's like, whoa, you're not supposed to
Whoa.
say that, man. But yeah, but whatever. He came to that conclusion by his own accord, and he's free to do that in as much as he is a subject, right? But once you deny somebody of their subjectivity by saying he has no soul, he's just a pile of neurons that evolved in a particular way, and he's not even capable of ascertaining his own sociological or political world in any regard, then he is really just an object that I can categorize as needed. And we all adopt the mentality of a sort of Machiavellian politico, as if we were all running for a presidential campaign or a state senate campaign, and we're all expected to have opinions quite like a politician, where people will meet each other now and they'll say, well, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? What's your take on this? And it's like, am I a senatorial candidate on tour being interviewed?
Yeah,
And why are you asking me these questions?
we're all assumed to have an opinion on all things at all times now. Yeah, which is
Right.
very strange.
It is. Yeah. Yeah.
You're allowed to not know, and more importantly, and this is something I think gets lost in the machine age and this the replacement of belief and veneration and God and the divine and things that are older than all of us, is that we're almost required to care about
Yeah.
certain stuff.
Right.
Like, take for instance, like, try and have a conversation with anybody now, especially the libs, about climate change, about the sky. Like, if you say, I don't care, that's beyond my ken. I am not a meteorologist. I am not a climate scientist. I'm just a human trying to get by, and gas costs too much money because of all the taxes on it. Like,
Right.
you might as well have just have shown up at a synagogue and started
Right.
preaching about Jesus to the Jews or something. Like, you
Right.
know,
Right.
it just fries their brains that you don't care, right? Or
And
your concern is for other things. And the funny thing about another contradiction is that the people who are really into materialism and reject metaphysics, spirituality, faith, um, if you have a different material concern to them, that material concern doesn't matter, right? Like, they have this
yeah.
one material concern, but your material concern, which is very proximate to you and is very important to your life in the material realm, that they just dismiss it, right?
Right.
Like,
Right.
it has to be their material concern. So
Yeah.
there's just contradiction upon contradiction.
Yeah, and I think with the example of climate change, notably, you could even not deny the scientific consensus on climate change. You could even say you believe in it. But if you say, well, I have no power to change that, and it's not really germane to my life, you could even acknowledge it as a tragedy. But if you say, well, I have no volition here, people get upset. And it's the same about anything else, right? Like I've rankled people in the last few weeks of talking about immigration. What am I going to do? I can't run for office. I mean, I suppose I could try, but it might take decades. And what would have happened in the intervening decades? How much money would it have taken? What compromises would I have had to make of my own principles to even get into a position of power? I could vote. It would take decades. I could show up to the border with my gun, and probably go to prison. Uh, I could retweet angry, rage bait tweets all day. I think that's what they want me to do. It's like, look, I can acknowledge that this is an issue, but I have no volition here. So I'm not going to sit here and stew in rage about a thing I can't change. And that's what a lot of it runs on is, you know, metaphysics doesn't exist. You can't have divided loyalty to anything but the system as it is. The system as it is categorizes everything into objects. And if you don't arrange those objects in a very particular way that results in rage, even if it's totally impotent rage that might even shorten your life by causing stress, you could have stress heart attacks about this. And they say, well, that's good. At least you care about the things you're supposed to care about. That's the net result of it, and it drives people crazy. So it's not like, it doesn't feel particularly radical to oppose this sort of thing. And I think I'll add another thing just that's germane to some of what's been said about my whole journey recently with contemplating expatriation, about how people categorize people. They categorize countries the same way. Like the guy you talk to at the bar categorizes Canada, good. Canada, better than here. Canada is inviolably more humane and more open and good. And I wish America was more like Canada, right? You tell a conservative, I'm thinking about moving to Mexico because there's less restrictions and there's actually, ironically enough, maybe more freedom there than there is here. And they think Mexico, cartel, cuts your head off immediately. You cross the border in 5 minutes, cartel kidnaps you and takes you away. Whether you're in a resort in Veracruz or whether you're in Tijuana, it doesn't matter. The whole country is cartel. Or my cousin told our aunts and uncles one day, he said, I think I'm going to go visit Chicago with my wife because we're curious about what is out there. And they convinced him not to go because they were convinced that the entirety of Chicago was a kill zone, which is absurd. But when you think in the categorizational mindset of how people think these days, that's what you do. It's like a short circuit. All of the complexity of the world, the gigantic world that's so rich and different and diverse and complicated, it all becomes just a series of very brief, terse little objects. And you say, yeah, I already know all about that. They're killing everybody in Chicago. Okay, right. Whatever. I think it's a simplistic thing. People are addicted to oversimplification because the world is so far beyond the comprehension of a single human mind. So they have to shorten everything and abbreviate it so that they can think about it really quick, because you have to have an opinion on everything.
Right. Well, I
You
mean,
know?
that you can abbreviate it even more quickly just by not caring and not feeling compelled to care about certain things.
Sure,
Like you don't have to.
sure.
You don't have to. You can just live
Right,
your life, love your wife, have some kids, build your 49cc engine bicycle that runs on chestnuts or whatever, and it's going to take you down the Blue Ridge Parkway one day when it all collapses, or maybe even
right,
before. Just
right.
do it. I don't know. I think there's a lot of optimism in your line of thinking, and there's a liberatory power in confronting this machine thing by acknowledging the possibilities to be found and that are there in this sort of spiritual realm, and
Yeah,
just not, I mean, whatever it sounds like, oh, you just be a Christian and reject this world and we're all looking forward to heaven. Well, okay, maybe, but like at the same time, you don't have to reject the world to reject how we think about it. All right.
yeah,
Which makes up
yeah,
so much of this architecture around us, which is in a way a type of prison.
yeah, yeah. It is. It is. It is. Yeah, it certainly is. And I don't know. At day's end, I think it's more optimistic on a deep level to first disabuse yourself of false optimism. And people don't understand that a lot of times in how I think, right? Is that if you want to plant something fruitful on an acre of land, you have to clear away the things that are not fruitful. And if you fail to do that, and as you do that, somebody could say, "Oh, you're cutting that away. That might bear fruit one day." And you're like, "Look, it's clearly not going to bear fruit. I'm cutting it down so that I can make room to plant something that's actually going to work." Right? So when I people think, "Oh, he's doom posting. Oh, he's so depressive." Or so I had people yesterday calling me. They said I was manic, depressive, bipolar. I had all these people trying to diagnose me with mental illness because I don't I entertain all these different ideas, and I'm willing to say, look, here's some problems I see with the political arena, with America. These things are not inviolable and sacred, because if they're inviolable and sacred as they currently are, then you can't actually be optimistic about ever changing them or articulating any kind of an alternative, and you just have to embrace the status quo, full stop, which is the definition of fatalism and nihilism,
Right.
to me.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, well, it's interesting that the people who are most afflicted with a very real mental virus called spreadsheet brain, as our friend Ashley would put it,
right,
see anybody who tries to live outside all of the rectangles on the spreadsheet as those with the problem. But anyway,
right.
Andy, we've been going for over 2 hours, man. Um, any final parting thoughts? Anything you want to tell people before we wrap it up here? I gotta go. I gotta go and meet some people and look at a job. So
I don't know. I think that about wraps it up. I mean, I think, the just sort of driving home the point of, you're going to be religious no matter what. You might as well take control of it. And just saying that the world is big, the world is complicated. There's a lot of different paths out there to take, and it's not a particularly outrageous or unnatural path to go around the world and see what's out there. And it's not a particularly outrageous path to study different religions and see what's out there. And any way that a human mind can get themselves outside of the contract based, anti romantic, materialist, machinic mode of thinking I think that's the central task of this era. And articulating ways to do that, and exploring what that looks like, and having the courage to engage in endeavors and undertakings, the logic of which runs totally contrary to what is now socially acceptable and considered normal. People need to be willing to do this, or there will never be any meaningful change if we're just waiting for a political savior, or waiting for some inevitable contradiction to resolve itself. We really have to start acting now on an individual level and seeing what works, and that should include everything by default. We should entertain every conceivable avenue to preserving some semblance of a human, romantic, worthwhile iteration of human culture.
Amen to that, sir. Where can people find you online?
Shagbark.substack.com. That's where I do my long form writing, and that's what makes my daily bread.
That's right. And you should get a subscription so that Andy can buy lentils and rice.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, and maybe travel to Greenland and the Faroe Islands so I can report back and tell everybody what's actually out there.
I hope you get to. One of my sort of younger man missions was to take a boat from Newfoundland to Iceland to the Faroes to Scotland or Norway.
Yeah.
Never quite worked it out because M-Skip stopped letting passengers on their cargo vessels from St. John's to Reykjavik.
Of course you know this. Of course, I've looked into the same thing, and I've even tried to find employment with M-Skip. And I speak some Norwegian. I speak enough Norwegian to where I think I could probably work with these Norwegian guys, but they didn't want to hear from me, so I'll have to figure something out.
Man, so everyone go subscribe to Andy's Substack and look forward to his piece on getting his butt to the Faroe Islands somehow in the not too distant future, probably immediately after he gets married in June or something, right?
Yeah. It's either South America or Europe after June. Yep.
All right, sir. Well, good luck to you. I might be seeing you on the eclipse day here on Monday, maybe.
Hope so. Yeah, hope so.
All right. Well, let's talk about that back channel. All right, everyone. Thanks for listening. Go read Andy's stuff. It's amazing. And way the road.